Let's get to Ole Miss. Let's go down to Oxford or go up to Oxford, down I-55, which, by the way, I-55 runs right through where we are. You can take I-55 north and head to Oxford and be in with the Rebels. Oh, excuse me. A little belch here. The Ole Miss Rebels were the team this year that shook, and I say this, shook the sport to some extent in the offseason. Maybe not shake the sport, but Ole Miss this year, what they've done in the offseason, the transfer portal, is nothing, guys, quite honestly, short of amazing. Now, you know, I know, everybody knows what they did in recruiting, in the portal, and how they got to where they are. Now, I don't think anybody disagrees with how they did it. I don't think anybody really worries with how they did it because, look, that's how the portal is done. They go out and get guys like Trey Amos, the corner from Alabama. They go and get Amarian Walker, the DB from Michigan. But obviously they made the big additions with getting Prince Yellen from Florida, who had 10 sacks at Florida a year ago. They go and get probably the number one overall player in the portal, that being Walter Nolan. They go and get a receiver in Juice Wells from South Carolina, who a lot of people, if you remember last offseason, had a lot of high hopes for him with the Gamecocks, just did not come to fruition, was a little hurt, and that cut his season short. They go and get an inside linebacker in Chris Paul Jr. They added, especially defensively, a really, really, really good influx of talented human beings. Now, the question becomes, how quickly can this unit and this team come together, work together, and propel Ole Miss to where Lane Kiffin is trying to go? Now, Lane Kiffin has not made any bones about it. He has not sugarcoated it. He has not held his tongue with, hey, at Ole Miss, we cannot and we are not going to win the games like against Georgia or Bama or whoever it may be until we start getting more talented guys in here defensively. Well, their booster group went out there and said, well, if this is what you need, you needed the money. You've won 10 games or had 2 seasons where you've won 10 games in the regular season. We're going to give you the money to go and compete and do this. The question is Ole Miss able to take that next step in 2024? I look at what they have coming back and what they have offensively. Now, they do bring in some offensive linemen that possibly that they did not have last year. You bring in Diego Pounds, you bring in Nate Kalepo, you bring in Julius Bololo as well. You have Jeremy James returning. You have Caleb Warren returning, and you add a lot of pieces. So I do even think that they advanced themselves and got better along the offensive line. Now, you do have a really good running back that we've talked about a lot on this show that is leaving. But you do have Ulysses Bennett, the fourth, who I thought had some really good times last year. You bring in Logan Diggs, who, by the way, is going to be hurt, tore his ACL. But it's going to be really tough from a running back room to be able to replace a Quinshon Judkins. But I don't know if Ole Miss offensively does not have one of the better units in not only the SEC, maybe the country. Now, you bring in Juice Wells, who has a lot of hype and a lot of potential. Can Juice Wells build off of what he did 2 years ago? Can he build off the hype that a lot of people have for him? But you pair him up with a guy like Trey Harris, guys, who do you try to take away and limit? If Juice Wells is the guy that we think he can be and doesn't get hurt, doesn't have an off year, who do you try to take away? You have one of the better receiver corps in the country in Oxford. Now, there's another young man that they added that I am very familiar with in covering LSU and just covering the sport. You had a guy like Deion Smith, who is also going to be a really good addition for them. You also have Jordan Watkins and Caden Lee there as well, and you add in Devin Price with that. Guys, offensively, I think they're just going to be just as good. Now, you got to find out quickly because Lane loves to run the football. And with the weapons that they've added offensively, how effectively without Quinshon Judkins, I think is going to be the number one question. How effective are they running the football? Because I don't really think that they're going to have a problem, though. I really don't. Now, you add in Logan Diggs, who maybe at earliest or at best comes into next season, maybe mid-October, maybe. We're going to have to find out even through spring what they have in that room. But with everything that they are gaining offensively and all the talent that they have offensively, Jackson Dart, who we'll talk about in a minute, the thing and the missing piece that they think that they were missing was clearly on defense. And the question will be, and why a lot of people think that they're potentially a playoff lock, a team that will be in that final 12. And guys, they might arguably be, is what they're doing on defense. You bring in Walter Nolan, you bring in Princely from Florida, you bring in Chris Paul Jr., you bring in Trey Amos, Key Lawrence, Amarian Walker. Guys, they instantly have gotten better on defense. And with Pete Golding being there, who I think is still a really good play caller, guys, they're one of the top teams in the SEC. I don't think that you can look at them. Now, regardless if it's sustainable or not, I'm not even talking about that. We're talking about this year. Guys, on paper right now, on March the 4th, they're one of the best teams in the SEC. I think you can make the argument they're a top 3 team in the conference. I don't think that that's even a question from an on-field talent aspect. The question will become is, can Jackson Dart take that next step? Now, with all the talent that they've had, you've seen teams like even Alabama last year that had a crap load of talent. You got to let your quarterback play and really take over for you to take that next step. That is the ultimate key. We've seen teams in the past do that. We've seen LSU in 2019. We've seen Alabama, the reverse side of that, literally last year with Jalen Milroe. I do think a lot of this falls on Jackson Dart propelling them to that next level. But I look at their schedule, okay? And I look at what Ole Miss has next year in 2024. They start off the year with Furman. They play Middle Tennessee. They play at Wake Forest. Yawn, double yawn. They have Georgia Southern. Yawn. Kentucky. I think they're better than Kentucky. They go to South Carolina. They're better than South Carolina. They go to LSU, which I think they will go into that game undefeated. Without a shadow of a doubt, they would have beaten Furman, Middle Tennessee State, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, Kentucky, and South Carolina. They are going into Baton Rouge 6-0. How do they come off of? Now, they got South Carolina and Columbia and LSU and Baton Rouge. Can they? That would be the first test that they have in the year. Can they go back-to-back weeks on the road and get wins? That is it. They will go into Baton Rouge 6-0 and be undefeated. I don't know if they can beat LSU. And you could say I'm biased with that. It is what it is. I'm not going to defend myself on that right now. Playing at night in Death Valley, good luck. That is what I'll tell you. And potentially both teams could be undefeated. But they have LSU, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Georgia. That is the toughest stretch of their schedule. And by the way, they got to go to Florida after they face Georgia, which is never easy to play, even though Billy Napier is there and on the hot seat. It's a tale of two seasons, really. Season 1, you don't really play anybody remotely tough. Maybe South Carolina is your toughest game. But the back half of this, LSU on the road, Oklahoma, what is Brent Venables going to do in year 3? How good can Jackson Arnold be at Oklahoma? You got Arkansas on the road. I don't have a lot of faith in them. But you have Georgia at home. And then Florida and Mississippi State. Guys, at worst, I do think, for me, the floor is 10-2. Now, the question will ultimately become, and it's like this when you add a lot of players from the portal. Either you really hit or you really miss. I think they're going to really hit here, man. I think that they're a really good team. I think they're going to be a team that we look at, man, say they have improved based off of what they've done guys, Walter Nolan and Princely Human Yellen, okay, he's just off the bat makes them 10 times better on defense than they were a year ago. 10 times better than where they were just this time last year. Now, you got Perkins that returns, okay, as well. I think they're going to utilize him in a big way. You got Ivy that is returning, who is going to be a senior. And they've completely upgraded in their secondary. I think Trey Amos was one of the least talk about DBs last year at Alabama, who, when he came in that SEC championship game, played like a dog. Was really good. Chris Paul is a tackling machine, the linebacker from Arkansas. I think at worst, I really do believe this. At LSU against Georgia, maybe Oklahoma, maybe. I don't think they can lose to Florida. Year one under Mississippi, Jeff Lebby and Mississippi State, I don't think they lose the Egg Bowl. If you were to ask me right now on paper, do I think that Ole Miss is a playoff team that could be a lock? I would honestly tell you, I would lean more to saying yes than I would be saying no. We'll just have to see how good they can and will be. All right. Brandy Blake, our big-time Rebel fan here. She said the Magnolia Bowl could always go either way, and you and I both know that, Blake. Oh, I'm not saying it couldn't. But that's why I'm saying I can't pick them. I mean, if you're talking about worst-case scenario, like worst-case scenario,